jump from 60 Hz to 120 Hz can make gaming feel noticeably smoother, which is why high refresh rate TVs have become so popular. Now manufacturers are pushing even further, advertising 144 Hz and 165 Hz panels as the next major upgrade. But there is an important detail hidden behind those bigger numbers. The PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X currently stop at 120 Hz. That raises a surprisingly complicated question, because if your console cannot send more than 120 frames per second, does a 165 Hz television actually improve anything, or are you paying extra for performance you will never use? Before answering that, it helps to understand the difference between refresh rate and frame rate. Refresh rate describes how many times the television can update the image every second, while frame rate describes how many new frames your console or computer is producing. A 165 Hz television can refresh the screen 165 times per second, but if the game is only running at 60 frames per second, the TV is still receiving just 60 unique frames, so the higher refresh rate cannot magically create additional gameplay information. This is why the source matters just as much as the display. A game running at 120 frames per second can take advantage of a 120 Hz television, while a gaming PC producing 165 frames per second can benefit from a 165 Hz panel. However, when the source stops at 120 FPS, the additional refresh capability remains unused unless the television is performing some form of processing, which is not the same as receiving real frames generated by the game. The numbers also reveal why the improvement becomes smaller as refresh rates increase. At 60 Hz, each refresh takes approximately 16.7 milliseconds, while at 120 Hz, that interval falls to around 8.3 milliseconds. Moving from 120 Hz to 165 Hz reduces it again, but only to about 6.1 milliseconds, meaning the jump from 60 to 120 Hz saves more than 8 milliseconds per refresh, while the jump from 120 to 165 Hz saves only a little over 2. That does not mean the difference between 120 and 165 Hz is imaginary, but it does explain why it is much less dramatic. Moving from 60 Hz to 120 Hz can make camera movement look significantly clearer and controls feel more immediate, while moving from 120 Hz to 165 Hz usually feels like a smaller refinement rather than an entirely different experience. For PlayStation 5 owners, a native 120 Hz television already provides everything the console can currently use at its maximum supported refresh rate. Sony officially supports 4K video output at 120 Hz on compatible displays, but the console does not output games at 144 or 165 Hz. Therefore, a 165 Hz television will normally operate at 120 Hz when connected to a PS5, meaning the gaming experience will not become smoother simply because the panel has a higher maximum number. The same principle applies to Xbox Series X, which supports gaming at up to 120 frames per second in compatible titles. A 165 Hz television may still be an excellent match for Xbox because it could include better HDR, lower input lag, stronger local dimming, or more HDMI 2.1 inputs, but those advantages come from the television's complete performance rather than the console using all 165 refreshes. There is also an important difference between owning a 120 Hz console and actually playing at 120 FPS. Many visually demanding games still target 30 or 60 frames per second because developers must balance resolution, graphical detail, ray tracing, and performance. Some titles include optional 120 FPS modes, especially competitive shooters, racing games, and other fast-paced releases, but choosing that mode may require reducing resolution or visual quality. If your favorite games normally run at 60 FPS, a 165 Hz television will not suddenly make them look like 165 FPS games. It may still provide good motion handling and low latency, but the largest improvement would have already occurred when moving from a basic 60 Hz display to a capable 120 Hz model with variable refresh rate and a responsive game mode. If you are currently comparing gaming TVs, I have linked several strong 120 Hz, 144 Hz, and 165 Hz models in the description below, where you can check today's prices, availability, and buyer reviews. Discounts change frequently, and sometimes a faster television becomes worth considering because the complete TV is better, even when you do not immediately need its maximum refresh rate. PC gaming is where 165 Hz becomes much more meaningful because a powerful graphics card can produce frame rates above 120 FPS in a much wider range of games. Competitive titles often prioritize speed over maximum graphical detail, making it possible for a well-equipped computer to deliver 144, 165, or even more frames per second consistently. When the PC is genuinely producing those additional frames, the 165 Hz display can show newer visual information more frequently than a 120 Hz panel. Mouse movement can feel slightly more immediate, rapidly turning the camera can appear cleaner, and tracking a moving opponent may become easier, particularly for experienced competitive players who are already accustomed to high refresh rate monitors. However, the difference is most noticeable when several conditions are met at the same time. The game must run consistently above 120 FPS, the PC must support the required resolution and refresh rate through the television's inputs, and the player must be sensitive enough to motion and latency to appreciate the relatively small improvement. Viewing distance also matters. Someone sitting close to a large TV and using a mouse to play a fast competitive shooter is more likely to notice the difference than someone sitting several feet away with a controller while playing a slower cinematic adventure. At normal living room distances, 120 Hz already appears extremely smooth, so the improvement to 165 Hz can be difficult to recognize unless the two displays are compared directly. You should also verify exactly how a television achieves its advertised refresh rate. Some models offer a native 144 Hz or 165 Hz panel at 4K, while others promote gaming accelerator modes that reach extremely high refresh rates only after reducing the resolution to 4040p or 1080p. Native 165 Hz TVs are now available, but the supported combinations of resolution, refresh rate, and HDMI input can differ between models. That distinction can completely change the value of the feature. A PC gamer may happily reduce the resolution to gain more frames in a competitive game, while someone buying a premium 4K television may not want to sacrifice image sharpness just to activate the largest refresh rate number shown in the marketing. Refresh rate also does not guarantee excellent motion clarity by itself. Pixel response time determines how quickly the display can change from one color to another, and a slow panel can leave visible trails or smearing even when it refreshes at 165 Hz. A responsive 120 Hz display may therefore look cleaner in motion than a poorly controlled 165 Hz panel, especially during dark scenes where some LCD televisions struggle with slower transitions. Input lag follows a similar rule. A faster refresh rate can reduce the time the display waits before presenting a new frame. But total responsiveness also depends on the game engine, controller, console or computer, television processing, and game mode. Simply choosing the highest refresh rate number does not guarantee that the complete gaming experience will be faster. Variable refresh rate may actually matter more than the difference between 120 and 165 Hz. Games rarely maintain a perfectly fixed frame rate, and VRR allows the television to adjust its refresh timing as performance changes, reducing tearing, judder, and stutter. A polished 120 Hz VRR experience can feel more consistent than an unstable game fluctuating across a wider 165 Hz range. For movies and regular streaming, the higher maximum refresh rate offers very little direct benefit. Films are commonly presented at 24 frames per second, while television broadcasts and online videos generally remain well below 120 fps. A 120 Hz panel is already extremely flexible for this content, and buying a 165 Hz television will not make Netflix movies appear smoother or more detailed simply because the panel can refresh faster. A 165 Hz model may still provide superior movie performance if it also has better contrast, brighter HDR, stronger local dimming, or more accurate color. But once again, those are separate picture quality advantages. The refresh rate should be treated as one feature within the complete television rather than proof that the TV is automatically better. Future-proofing is a reasonable argument for choosing 165 Hz, especially if you plan to connect a gaming PC or keep the television for many years. The additional headroom gives future devices more room to exceed 120 FPS, but future-proofing should not encourage you to sacrifice the picture quality you use every day. If a strong 120 Hz model offers better black levels, cleaner motion, brighter HDR, or a larger screen for the same price, it may provide the better experience even though its maximum refresh rate is lower. On the other hand, when two televisions are closely matched and the 165 Hz model costs only slightly more, choosing the faster panel can make sense because you gain additional flexibility without giving up anything important. So, can you tell the difference between 120 Hz and 165 Hz? Under the right conditions, yes, especially on a powerful gaming PC running competitive titles well above 120 frames per second. The improvement is real, but it is much smaller than the difference between 60 and 120 Hz, and many console players may never see it at all. For PS5 and Xbox Series X, a high-quality native 120 Hz television remains more than enough because both consoles currently top out at 120 Hz. For casual PC gaming, 120 or 144 Hz should also feel extremely smooth, while 165 Hz becomes most valuable for competitive PC players who can consistently produce enough frames to use it. The most important lesson is not to pay for 165 Hz simply because the number sounds more advanced. Check what your gaming device can output, which resolution the television supports at its maximum refresh rate, whether it includes VRR, and how well the panel handles motion. When those pieces work together, 165 Hz can be a worthwhile improvement, but for most living room gamers, 120 Hz is already the point where refresh rate stops being a major limitation. If you would like to compare current prices, availability, and buyer reviews for recommended 120 Hz and 165 Hz TVs, you will find the links in the description below. Let me know in the comments whether you can notice the difference above 120 Hz, especially if you have compared these refresh rates on the same gaming setup.